I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't, but my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares.
Wow, what a racket. What a racket. Okay, good to see you guys, all four of you. I just wanted to come on very quickly just to share some of my thoughts, some of my feelings on this. I've seen what some other people have been saying, and I sort of feel like, I've actually been to the house myself a few times, more than once, and I've been to Moscow, I've been to Pullman, and this case is also quite important to me. I've been covering it for quite a long time, so I kind of want to talk about it. I think the true crime community are concerned, and to some extent, rightfully so. But also, I think it's quite important to address the other side, which I don't hear very much. I hear all the reasons why we should keep the house, and I don't really see the other conversation. And I think it's important to morning, Joe. How good to see you. I see what you're saying, Stacey. I think it's important, first of all, just to say it's the prosecution and the defense that have basically consented to this. It's not as though one side is pushing it down the throats of everyone else. The prosecution and the defense are, I don't want to say they're happy, but they are okay with what's going on. The other thing that I want to say by way of analogy is if you think about any crime and every crime, what is one of the most important, I don't even want to call it pieces of evidence, but what do you think is one of the most important things to deal with, especially when it's a homicide? Like, what is the most important aspect to a murder investigation, essentially? And that's the victim's body. It is the body being an archive of the injuries, the body being giving a sense of the wounds that were suffered, where they were suffered, how they were suffered, when and all of that. And if you think about it, do we say, well, if the body is destroyed, then there's no way this case is going to be won? Do you know what I'm saying? In other words, the body of a victim is the best evidence that this person was killed. How on earth can you allow that to be destroyed? Aren't you destroying all evidence? Aren't you going to need to go back to that body, right? And the fact is that sometimes it has happened. Sometimes they have buried murder victims only to exhume them, like Rebecca Zahau is a good example. Stephen Smith is a very current example. Even JonBenet Ramsey, there was a request to exhume her body. I think they wanted to check the injuries on her skin. Were they made by a stun gun? Was it something else, right? What I'm trying to compare this to, the destruction of this house, which is a physical structure, to the destruction of a human body. And how often do you need to go back and look at the human remains? And the answer is sometimes, but I think it's fair to say that the archive of that tends to be kept in terms of autopsy photos, and that tends to be more than sufficient. Absolutely, absolutely. Someone saying, you see, it's this kind of comment that sort of makes you wonder. People talking about a mistrial, totally unnecessary kind of comment. Someone says destroying the house is part of a concealment. Anyway, so I'm going to take you guys through just a couple more of my thoughts. And first of all, I've got to say I agree. The house on 112 King Road that's being torn down today, if not right now, is an important piece of evidence. So no one's arguing against that part. It is important evidence. And I agree that it's better to have it than to not have it. I think the other side of that equation, if you kind of reasonable, is you'll say that house has been there for a year and 3 months, a year and 2 or 3 months. So there's been ample opportunity to look at it, to walk through it, to recover evidence. I don't think you can say that there's been a rush. There's been a rush, and I mean that was actually mentioned this month. That why is there this rush to demolish the building? Well, there hasn't been a rush for a really long time. The answer that they want to do it now is because of the students returning in a couple of weeks. They want it gone by then. So there hasn't been a rush all year. But I would also say on paper and in a world where there was only a crime scene and a courtroom, which I think for our community, for true crime, sometimes it feels like that is the world, that the only things in the world are crime scenes and courtrooms. And in a world like that, it would make perfect sense to preserve the house at 112 King Road. You might even say, so what if the house is in a student community? So what if the town is a student town? So what? The right thing to do here is to preserve the scene. And I think that's true. It is the right thing to do here. But I can't help feeling, aren't we missing something? It's the right thing to do, undoubtedly, but aren't we missing something? And don't we need to think a bit further than that, than what's the right thing? What's the right thing for perhaps this case? Are you guys familiar with this term, sang-froid? It means composure. It means coolness under trying circumstances. It means being self-possessed and level-headed. And I would say what's required right now, not that this is like an emergency, but what's required right now is a little bit of level-headedness and the ability to think in a cool, composed, and intelligent manner. Do you guys agree with that? And are people doing that? Are people thinking in that manner? And all I'm saying right now is please try and remain cool and calm when I simply say something that you probably haven't heard too much from other folks, right? And so in other words, this is going to be a test of your sang-froid, and it's a good quality to have, right? It also means having a strong enough sense of self not to be easily manipulated by emotions, by those around you, even by big groups who think differently. And so with that in mind, let's jump into what I call 7 serious logic failures. And I'm going to be telling you or sharing with you the notion of keep the house or lose the house within the context of the fabric of the case itself. Connie, good to see you. Karen says safety is important as well. Okay, so the first thing I want to mention is there's no cover-up of the crime scene here. So it's not as though someone broke into the house and committed a crime and then covered up evidence and so that in other words making the crime scene quite complicated. For example, in the John Benet Ramsey case, there's kind of a complicated to some extent, to the extent that there's staging and there's that sort of thing. You don't have that here, right? You don't have a situation where there's complexity in the crime scene because it's been covered up. You might say, how on earth do you know that? Well, it's quite simple. The perpetrator was basically, how can I put it? He was seen leaving, and he basically was, you could even say, interrupted in the middle of perpetrating the crime. There were people. There was a defensive thing going on. People were fighting back. There was noise that was increasing. And I think you could say that the perpetrator didn't really leave when it suited him. He left kind of because he had to, because he had run out of time, possibly run out of energy, and possibly also left his nerve. What I'm trying to say is he didn't go into the house and commit a crime and wipe things away and so on. It actually feels like he made quite a mess of what he did. He left things behind and so on. But the point being, if he didn't cover up the crime scene, then you don't really need to kind of go back and look at things, because there's not too much complexity. If there's a crime scene, then what you see is what you get. The way that he left the poor victims in their beds is the way that they were left in their beds, right? So there's no real cover up of the crime scene. I suppose you could argue that in terms of the survivors, did they go into the rooms? Did other people go into the rooms? In terms of all of that, in terms of that time period, I suppose you could argue that, but I don't think you can then say, well, that they are then the murderers. I mean, they found the crime scene the way they did, right? So anyway, that's the first point to make. The other one is witnesses, and bear in mind, all of this strengthens the prosecution's case. The fact that you had witnesses in this case, I think one witness, means that it's not like this is such a difficult case to prosecute. You had someone who believed she saw the intruder and saw the intruder walk right by her, right? And so again, this is not in terms of murder investigation. This is almost unprecedented. It's very rare that you have someone inside a building where someone was murdered live to tell the tale. If you think about so many cases, that simply isn't the case. One rare exception is, I guess, the Amanda Knox case, where there were certain people there who claimed to be witnesses. It's a little bit of a different situation, but nevertheless, that case does come to mind. Then the third one is inside is what counts, right? Inside this house is what counts. The importance of this house isn't really the outside of it, the shell. It's not the topography of the house, of the property on which the house is found. It's the inside. It's what happened inside two rooms. That's really what matters. And I think we've already found out, based on the affidavit, I don't know whether it's exhaustive, I don't know if it's complete in terms of this aspect, but not much evidence was left on the outside. I don't know if footprints were left behind. I don't know if a scent was left behind. But in terms of the immediate outside of the house, I don't really get a sense that there's a terrible amount of evidence left behind. Certainly one thing that you didn't see, which was a little bit surprising, was a blood trail, right? So I don't know if the outside is really that important, and that is what's being ostensibly destroyed here. You might say, well, the inside is also going to be destroyed. Yeah, but that was destroyed a long time ago, right? The inside doesn't look like it did when all of this happened, right? And that, I think, brings up a really interesting sort of idea, and that is, just think about this. If a jury did go to the house, just follow what I'm saying here. If the jury decided they wanted to go to the house, and the house still stood, and they did go to the house, you could actually have it backfire in terms of the prosecution, in the sense that you enter through the door, you step inside, and you just kind of have an empty shell, and you sort of feel like, well, nothing, did anything really happen here? There's no real evidence of anything, right? In other words, there's no furniture, there's no beds, there's no blood, everything's been cleaned up. And so if you could wave a magic wand and keep the house and take a jury through it, more than likely it would be to the advantage of the defense, because there would be nothing to see there right now. Of course, what you would really want to see are the crime scene photos, probably body cam and things like that. That would give you a real sense of what the perpetrator left behind. What I'm trying to say is this whole idea that you want to preserve something that's already been destroyed a long time ago, and the important part of this crime scene is the inside of it, not the outside. And so that's already that would actually favor the defense, because jury folks would be like, you know what, this doesn't actually feel like anything happened here, right? And I can tell you, I don't know if you guys know, in the O.J. Simpson case, the jury went through O.J. Simpson's home, and what the jury didn't know was that the defense mischievously replaced a lot of, remember, it was a black man who was on trial. Many folks in the jury were black individuals. And what they didn't know was that the defense actually went in and swapped out things. If there was a photo of OJ with a white woman, or kind of, let's call it white art, then they would swap that out for something that would resonate more, I guess, with the jury. And there's quite a lot to say about that. But the point is, the inside of OJ's house was changed from what it really was to something else. And ultimately, OJ Simpson wasn't convicted. And I think a really good argument for why the prosecution lost is possibly that part, where the jury went into his home and it didn't look the way that it did originally. And what could have been far more helpful is if they showed photos of his home the way it did look at the time. Do you follow what I'm saying? It's quite an interesting analogy, right? That's it. That is it. Okay, so that then brings us to number 4. So the first 3 are, there's no cover-up of the crime scene, right? There's no attempt by the perpetrator to sanitize or move the victims or anything like that. There's also a witness, that's number 2. Number 3, inside is what counts. That's already been documented. And then number 4 is this one. Although all of this happened inside this box, there's essentially 2 crime scenes. There's basically a bedroom upstairs where there are 2 victims on a bed. I'm not sure if it's 1 bed or 2 beds, I guess 1 bed. But that's one crime scene. And then there's another crime scene where you have another 2 victims, but you essentially have 2 crime scenes, 2 rooms. And if you compare that to so many other cases, the murder of Meredith Kircher, but just so many cases, you tend to have one body lying somewhere. Yeah, you've got 2 different rooms and 4 bodies. I mean, it is horrific. But what I'm trying to say is, what is not lacking here is crime scene. What's the word? Crime scene details, crime scene evidence, crime scene idiosyncrasies, all sorts of things like blood spatter, and all that kind of evidence. And you might say, well, some of the evidence lacking is DNA. It's not a given that a perpetrator is going to leave DNA at the scene. In the Mo Wilson case, DNA was left on, I think, the seat post or somewhere on the bicycle, right? And if that perpetrator had not elected to take the bicycle out the house, then you wouldn't have any DNA in that case. You wouldn't have had any DNA. So what I'm trying to say is, that's quite a good analogy. In the murder of Mo Wilson, you had one victim, one area, one room where there was blood evidence and bullet casings and so on, and evidence of the perpetrator, right? Here you've got all of that times 2, right? And that is good for the prosecution, right? In terms of trying to make your case, this is good for the prosecution compared to a single crime scene. Okay, and now we go to number 5. And it's a kind of a rhetorical question. When last did a jury visit a crime scene? And the answer is, I think the Murdoch case, a jury visited the crime scene, and I think they said it was quite helpful. But beyond the Murdoch case, I can't think of another case. The Laurie Vallow case, the jury didn't visit any crime scene. Can you guys think of another case recently where a jury visited the crime scene? It doesn't really happen that often. It didn't happen in the Mo Wilson case. I actually think it could have been quite useful there, but it wasn't necessary because of, again, how much evidence they had in that case. And that's kind of the argument I'm making, is somehow I think, I'm not quite sure where it's come from, whether it's Howard Bloom, who basically said, well, if there's no motive, there's no crime, you're not going to get a conviction, which is not true. You don't need a motive. But from somewhere, there's been this perception has arisen that this is an incredibly difficult case to prosecute. I don't really get that idea at all. And if the prosecution felt that way, they would have kept the structure, and they haven't, right? I would say that there's negligible evidence left in the house, definitely. And then, so that the 6th point is just that all of this points to the strength of the prosecution's case. If anyone was afraid that this case could get away from them, it would be the prosecution. They would say, this is a case that's very important to the community. This is a case where there were 4 individuals that lost their lives. It's really important that of all cases, this is such a serious one, we need to treat this one with due respect, right? And I think they feel that they have. Old woman says, no jury visit crime scenes in Idaho. Wolfie says, I see on a couple of channels it's being torn down right now. Yeah, it is being torn down right now. Let's have a look. Let's have a look. See if anything's. Well, I'm certainly not picking up anything myself. Maybe it's on Twitter. Maybe it's on Twitter. Anyway, and so the last thing to say is that in the interest of the community, they do matter in terms of this case, even if they don't matter to you. And I think that is an important thing to say. The interests of the community do come into this. And I suppose you could say, why can't we wait another 6 months? Because that probably is what it would take. Let's demolish this after a trial. So you have the trial when all the students are away, and then when the students come back, I guess the trial might have been finished, and then you demolish the house. You will have impacted the lives of at least, the student community in Idaho is, I think, 8,000. You would have impacted the lives of perhaps as many as 1,000 or 2,000 new students, as well as just extending I guess, the trauma for those 8,000 who are there anyway. That's also a good point. The acoustics are useless when the house is empty. That's also a good point. I actually think that the acoustics are going to come down to what is heard on a ring camera. The acoustics is quite interesting in terms of what could have been heard by the survivors. That I guess is quite an interesting aspect. Let me have a look. WFLA. Let me have a look. I'm at the site of it. I just don't see anything on the main page. Oh, there it is. Okay. Took a little while.
Johan Rupert has frightened the government and big banks. He has discovered a platform that automatically...
Sorry,
glass door 6 inches to the left. If he would have done that, there would be a footprint here. And now it's all this virtual measurement and equations being used, math to recreate this.
Part of the house is being already removed, this part over here. They really didn't waste any time on the 28th. They've already gotten, I mean, the sun, I think, is barely up over there. So you can see they're already removing the, looks like the front section. And then I guess once they take that, once they remove that from the site, then the next step. As far as I remember, as you enter the door, there's a stairway that immediately takes you to the next level. But I mean, what is also interesting with this is we are getting a view of the inside of the house for the first time. The inside of the structure, whereas, I mean, I do think we've seen the inside in some videos posted on social media, and of course, in terms of the blueprints and 3D. But for us folk that have been, covering this case, none of us have gone inside. This is in a way a first peek inside the house. I don't know how much value there is in terms of that. If you look at that debris that's going in there, it's all structural materials, pieces of wood, pieces of wallpaper, I guess, some wires dangling out there as well. But that is quite an interesting point about the acoustics. That certainly is an interesting point. So what do you guys think of this whole idea of the interests of the community? Do you think that true crime is cognizant of that? Do you think this particular case happening in a student neighborhood, in a student town, do you think that is something that is relevant, or it's not relevant? Lisa McGuire, good to see you. Liesel says, this is such a nice surprise. I'm not sure what you mean, the live or what's actually happening. I also think it's very relevant. That's also quite an interesting point, is that, you know, is anyone going to try and steal a memento of the house? You know, I must say that is a kind of not a very nice aspect to it, you know, getting souvenirs of a murder house and who knows, selling it or something like that. But having said that, I've got, these are pieces of a church, I think, where Vincent van Gogh used to live in the Netherlands. So it's, I guess, is it very different to that? What do you guys think of that comment there? It's suspicious that the prosecution agreed to this. Do you think that that's true? And that's why we come back to this idea of keeping a cool head when this is happening. For my part, I think it makes complete sense that this is happening now. And I think it makes complete sense that it's happening to begin with. I don't see a conspiracy. But there are so many people saying that it's not a good idea that's why I think that is what people are thinking. You can see in the background, yeah, there are very few vehicles. Everyone has gone home. This is between Christmas and New Year, so this is quite a good time. Early in the morning, just after Christmas, when no one's around. Someone here says, what if the murder weapon was inside that house? I really don't think that's likely. What do you guys think? So do you guys agree that the right thing to do in terms of this case isn't necessarily the best thing to do? And I understand that's not a popular thing to say. I understand that because I've seen polls on Twitter and elsewhere where by far the majority of you say, no, keep the house. I guess I'm addressing the minority when I say, do you agree that the right thing to do isn't always the best thing to do? And what is the best thing? It's the best thing for the many students, right? And I think you can care about the 4 victims and also care about the 8,000 who are still alive and who want to have a happy and positive experience in that same area. If that makes sense. I've always said that I would prefer them to just alter the building, because if every time a crime is committed you destroy or demolish a building, you're going to start having a serious amount of you might even have a housing shortage. If every time someone commits a crime you destroy that house, you're going to have to destroy a lot of houses. So I don't really like the idea of this, but I also think we are in a way culpable. The media and the social media fixating on this case and on this house also means that the folks who live there can't really get on with things. It's kind of burned into their memories. And if we weren't so fixated on it, then maybe it wouldn't be such a, maybe people wouldn't be as aware of it. So there's a certain amount of awareness, I think, that's healthy, and then there's a certain amount that's not, right? The property was given back to the university by the owners, and they've had it, I think, since February. So the university have actually been quite patient, if you ask me, for about 10 months. Been quite patient. I've got an idea this is going to take all morning. I can't see that house still being there this afternoon because they've already gotten rid of quite a lot. What do you guys think? Okay. Let me ask you something else. Do you know why a trial date was set for the summer, or a trial date is being proposed for the summer of 2024? Why do you think that timing has been chosen? Right, it's the same as this timing. It's to protect the students. It's with the students. What's the students' well-being in mind, right? The idea is that the trial can occur when the students aren't there. Just the same thing, the demolishing of this building when the students aren't there. And you might say, I don't get it. Why is it so sensitive? I think it's totally different if you're a 30, 40, 50-year-old, 60-year-old, to if you're a 20-year-old and someone's your age were murdered in these circumstances. It's something that can traumatize a young person. A time when a young person is supposed to decide how much they want to give of themselves to the world and how much they trust themselves and they trust one another and they trust things that they don't know. And this is definitely not helpful to that whole psychology. And I think the folks at the university are very aware of that. And I also think Ethan's parents, whose siblings returned to the campus, they are supportive of what's happening here. And I don't think there's a better example of someone who has a stake in a real stake in whether that house stands or doesn't than Ethan's own siblings. You can imagine that they especially don't want to have to look at that house. Yeah, it is. It is delicate is definitely the word. Okay. Do you have too much else to say about this? Should have a look at your comments. Once a society shifts into prosecution by emotion, we are finished. That's true. That's true. Trying to think how emotion fits into the demolition of this house. Do you think it's an emotional step demolishing this house? Do you think it's all about emotion? Because I think it's kind of two things. It's, first of all, like I say, the fact that it stood for over a year. I don't think anyone got emotional like in a rush. I think having it stand for a year was sensible, but I also think getting rid of it at a good time is also sensible. But I also think you don't just completely ignore the emotional aspect in terms of this community. I don't think that's fair either. And I do think you've got to think about that side to it in terms of a community like this that is quite fragile. Leslie says it would have been a few hours during a weekday for a walkthrough. What was the rush? Well, I think what you're missing is, a few hours, but you'd have to wait another 6 months for that. The other thing is, couldn't this trial have been conducted this year? Right. In other words, if the trial just got going, then you wouldn't need to be in this position. And I think one of the reasons why the trial didn't get going was because there were so many arguments about the media access, right? The media aspect added to another layer where people were the media, I think, petitioned for cameras in the courtroom, and that was an additional thing that the court had to think and worry about. I think a lot of the conversations in court were about privacy, right? And if you didn't have that, you could also have had the survivors participating much sooner than what they have. Yeah, I guess that's quite a good point. UK lady says, I'm very disappointed in the demolition before trial. Leslie says, the students are old enough to deal with all this. I must say, if I think about the survivors, I don't get that idea. I get a sense that they are needing protection. I get a totally different feeling about that. That's a good point, but I think it's a little bit different. It's not as though like a war, reminders of a war or something that a community should observe, whereas something like this is slightly different. I think it's slightly different. That's my feeling. That's my feeling. But I also think one could have turned this house into a healing place, as crazy as that sounds. You could have had architecture students come there and find ways to transform a structure that makes it look and feel totally different. You could have had psychology students come there and deal with issues such as the damage that the media can cause to a community just through reporting, or not, how the media can actually help a community recover from trauma. Yeah, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. So thus far, one bedroom has already been basically removed, from what I can see. Okay. Do I have anything else to say here? Something I think we often miss in the true crime community is, well, here's a different angle. Look at that. So that part of the house is still there. Let's do this. The kitchen is over here, right? You can see it's absolutely deserted. There's no cars parked anywhere in this sort of area, no people wandering around, pretty deserted. So in terms of this case, we've been given a little bit of access to a couple of pages from an affidavit, and it's easy to assume that that is the sum of the state's case, that is the full amount of intel the cops have on this, and it's only when you attend a trial like the Laurie Vallow trial, you see just how much more information there is than you saw as someone following it in terms of the media narrative and in terms of what law enforcement disclosed. I think we tend to forget that. We think that everything that is knowable, you sort of assume over a period of time that things are being dug out and we are finding out what all there is to know. When you sit in on an actual trial, I also had this with the Mo Wilson case. I mean, I didn't sit in on that whole case, but you see photos that you haven't seen at all in the media narrative. You hear evidence. In that case, you hear that they had DNA. They could just as easily have kept the DNA narrative out of the affidavit, and no one would have known about it. No one knew about the DNA in the Mo Wilson case. And what I'm trying to say is the prosecution is often a lot stronger than you think it is, because you imagine you know all there is to know, and that's just not true. And I honestly feel the perception that has been created on social media is that this case is not a very easy case, or not a slam dunk, or that it's a conviction is in any doubt. I'm not quite sure where that comes from. In fact, I think I do know where it comes from. It comes from this ongoing criticism of law enforcement, that law enforcement aren't trustworthy and so on. That's actually where it's coming from. Well, that criticism of law enforcement may be valid here and there, but I don't think it's valid in this case. I don't think it's valid in this case. So yeah, we're getting a little bit of a sense of the structure. Actually, from this angle, I can't actually tell what we're looking at. It looks like the side of the kitchen. If you pass through there, this would be the kitchen. And bear in mind, that is where a witness said she saw the perpetrator walking through there, towards her and then through there. But just looking at this, I know it's not very easy to see, but just looking at what we're seeing, because we're seeing inside the house, can you see any sign of any blood spatter or anything like that? Have you seen anything like that in any of the images we've looked at? Well, no, because it's been cleaned up a long time ago. That part has been changed a long time ago. It's quite strange looking at this. My father's a builder, and there are so few bricks. There's so little bricks and mortar in this structure. It looks like it's made mostly out of wood and cardboard. There's a little bit of, is it called masonry over here on the side? But no wonder this house is taking so, no wonder it's being demolished in such a quick time. Okay, let's look at some of your comments. It doesn't look cheaply built. Donna says it's all really sad they were so young. And so there is something quite sad in how you see this house being torn down, which is kind of an analogy for the bodies of these youngsters being, torn as well. Something that was once a really beautiful building, I thought. I thought it, with all the lights on, and you can imagine the kids lots of kids there partying. The sounds, the sights. I think it was once upon a time almost like a fairy tale little castle, like a little bright light in the middle of that community, and for it to come to this. I've always felt that don't want to advertise for them. I've always felt that the destruction of the house is actually completing the work of the perpetrator. If the perpetrator wanted to inflict a psychological scar on the community, well, this is completing his work, right? Someone says, isn't this tampering with evidence? Well, if they were, if they didn't have permission to do this, and if all the paperwork hadn't been signed, but no, it's not. Lorraine says it's emotional to watch. I'm a little bit surprised that there are not more people ogling and recording this. I'm a little bit surprised. Maybe they're going to arrive there later on, you know, when it's sort of all over. I can't quite make out if he's about to push that into the structure or if he's just getting it out the way. There is a staircase that goes up through the center of the house to these bedrooms at the top. Do you remember there was a light saying good vibes? Well, those vibes are definitely out the window. Yeah, it looks like he's pushing into that part of the structure now. Wow, it's so paper thin. Look how thin it is. And one thing looking at this, you get a really clear idea of how easy it may have been for kids downstairs to hear what was going upstairs, right? Because this building is made of the type of material it's made of, you can also imagine that someone walking through the house, you would hear that quite clearly. Any sound of steps and so on, you would hear quite clearly. From below, someone going upstairs, going downstairs. It's kind of like a very thin shoebox made. It almost looks like it's made of balsa wood. So I think behind this part is the kitchen, and I think Kaylee's room was over here. And I think there's supposed to be a stairway going up in the central column. There's Can you see the inside is just completely white? There's not really anything to see. No pictures, no nothing. There's a bit of glass. Quite surprising that there's still some glass in this structure. I think behind that board on the left is Dee's room. So I must say one thing you can actually get as a benefit out of this is a sense of what it was like from Dee's room to Maddie's room, right? Because that one was directly above the other. You can see the whole house actually is moving with this big claw going into it now. So you've got to wonder what are they going to put in the place of this house? Are they going to build some other house? Are they going to have a garden? Is there going to be nothing there? Should you have nothing or should you have something? Yeah, lots of plywood, particle board. I must say these materials are quite shocking in a way. Thanks, Liesel. By the way, I did get your message. We will make a plan. Donna says a memorial garden. There's actually an arboretum. If you look where that balcony is, if you kept going in that direction, you would get to the arboretum. So there is quite a big garden just across the ridge, just on the other side of the ridge. It is quite a fast demolishing. This is definitely quite quick. I mean, a third of this house is already gone. This was Kaylee's room, right? And Murphy was in this room when the crime was committed. Murphy was sleeping in this room. And Dee I think said that she thought she could hear the dog, right? This gives you an idea of how thick the floor is and also what the materials are in the floor. We've gotten a sense just how thin the walls are between one room and another. Now we're getting a real sense of how probably how easy it was to hear between the one room and the next. You can almost imagine if a jury had to walk through here, what would they see? They would just see empty rooms. They would see everything out of context. I think one thing they could get out of going there themselves is get a sense of how long would it take to walk from one particular exterior door to Maddie's room, and then from Maddie's room, how long would that? But I mean, it's one thing to say it takes so many seconds. Might be quite interesting to do that yourself. But again, I don't think any of this is rocket science. I don't think you're going to lose a case because there it goes down. I don't think it's the case is like hanging on a thread that you would lose the case because you didn't know 100% about this or 100% about that. It is sad. I mean, it's everything you're seeing is gray and drab, and this used to be a colorful life and a lively spot, and now it's just ruined. It's just ruins, right? As someone said, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Well, I think that is about it. I don't think there's too much more that we can tell from the rubble. I'll just take a couple more questions and comments. Someone says, this doesn't feel right. Well, from that angle, you can see it's totally flattened. One thing you can appreciate a little bit from this angle is that the house obviously is built on a slope, and it's 3 stories, 3 floors essentially, and in terms of the killer having to there were 6 people in that house, I think, at the time. The killer went, I think, to the top to begin with. And what do you think? That he intended to kill all 6 people, or that he intended to kill one person and he thought Maddie was by herself? That's definitely, for me, one aspect that's still somewhat mysterious. Did he intend to kill one person, 2 people, 4 people, or 6 people? I don't think it's 6, and I don't think it's 4. I think it's 1 or 2. And I suppose that aspect could be dealt with in the, in terms of the cell phone records and the digital data. Another aspect that I think is quite interesting is the killer didn't strike when Ethan and Xana came home. They came home early, and then there were 4 people in the house. He waited until Maddie and Kaylee were home, and that's when he struck. And it actually seemed like Xana was still awake even when he did strike. Timmy, can I put you down? Okay, for my members, I have put up a interesting video on the John Benet Ramsey case. It's been flagged for limited ads. As a result, I put it on members only, but you might find that interesting. Pauline Buckles, I'm not sure, are you a member, Pauline? Because it would be quite cool if you could watch that video. I talk a little bit about why I don't think the bicycles are red herrings. You might want to check that out. can you believe it? That house is pretty much gone within, I mean, I've been on for an hour. It basically took an hour to demolish that house. Is that a teddy bear over there? What's that down there? What's that over there? Yeah, I think it's a teddy bear, part of the memorial. There's some crime scene tape. But definitely not too much left to look at now. Okay, what does Pauline say? Terry says, I respect the power of the statement, if walls could talk. Well, Terry, you know, in the future, maybe they can put things in walls, sensors in walls that can record incidents. And I mean, to some extent, security systems are doing that. But that is definitely quite a interesting comment to make in terms of true crime. What if the walls could talk? What if you could put sensors in them that allow them to? Thanks, Karen. Oh, you're a subscriber. Okay. Very symbolic. It is early in Idaho. I don't think the sun has come up there yet. Let's have a look when sunrise. (8:18). So the sun is due to come up in 40 minutes. So they actually managed to tear everything down more than half an hour before sunrise. That gives you an idea of how they wanted to go about this. So from my side, it looks like the trial may be in June 2024. And I may actually, if the trial had been this year, I don't think I would have even attended it. But if the trial's next year, I may actually be around. It might be in the States. And so I might actually sit in on the trial. I actually kind of want to attend an entire trial the next time I go to America. So who knows, this might be the trial that I'll do that with. I'm going to be talking about my trip through America in the next live tomorrow. But one thing I want to do differently on my third trip is I don't want to travel as much. I don't want to be doing the whole flight, hotel, car rental thing. Not only is it really expensive, it's just quite exhausting. And so I wonder if we can listen to what he's saying. Is he talking?
We appreciate the emotional connection some family members of the victims may have to this house. It is time for its removal and to allow the collective healing of our community to continue. And look.
So that's a statement from the university president. This is all about healing, right? Healing for the many, right? In any event, what I was saying is what I want to do when I visit America the next time is not go from the East Coast to the West Coast, north to south. I kind of want to be in one area and not move around as much, and be in one place for kind of an extended period. So I just need to decide where that's going to be. It's okay if it's one or two areas. I'm definitely not going to do New York like I did now. New York, California, Texas, Colorado, North Carolina. It's just too much. But I am thinking about, if the trial is in June, then I might actually attend it. So we'll see. I don't know what it's going to be like in terms of access. But the Lori Vallow case showed that even with a lot of interest, if you make an effort, you can attend. So we'll see. Okay, guys, that's it from me. Let's see who else is here. Stephanie, good to see you. Chelsea, have you just joined us? Yeah, so weird seeing it gone now. Well, that is it. That's all that's left. Okay, guys. There's just a hole now where that house used to be. I don't know. I think that's a lot uglier and than what was there. Having a big hole there, does that make you really feel any better? I don't know. It's almost, to me, more emotional seeing it torn down than seeing it standing. I don't know what you guys think. Okay, well, anyway, that's it from my side. Oh, have you been here from the beginning? Sorry, I missed you. Robbie Robin, I see you here as well. Okay. So hard to coordinate these things. Anyway, guys, take care, and I'll see you guys next time.